Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Media Watch. I'm your host, Dr. Savvy, and every week we try and get some fantastic guests, and we're still doing the home editions due to the COVID-19 situation. But it's my pleasure to bring you some great people on the show. One of the purposes of this show is really to bring about opinion that we don't necessarily always get in the wider media, but also to feature some brilliant people who are doing some great work out there and to get a cross-section of opinions. Now, one of the things that came to mind this week, and it was very active on social media, was the story that was going around about a young Sikh lad that got severely beaten outside his school. It was what appeared to be a bullying attack. And for me, it kind of struck a chord because born in the UK, and like many other people, when I went to school, there were very few brown people, and there are a lot more now, but hey, things haven't really changed that much, have they? So I wanted to kind of cover three areas. I'll tell you what they are first. First of all, we want to look at the fact that, what was the first impression that my guests got when they actually saw the video circulating? And am I cynical to say that, things have got a bit better or they've actually changed? And then, I watched recently this incredible movie called Schindler's List by Steven Spielberg, and it actually spoke about the positioning of the other, meaning an individual who isn't quite human. And then society does that. It does try and position real individuals, like position people like Jews or black people or minorities, and it starts to victimize them and then act in such horrible human ways as happened to Sikhs as well in India. Now, let me introduce the guests. First of all, we've got Harpreet Batra. Harpreet, welcome to the show. Tasleen, you're based over in Plymouth, taking time out of your, I would guess you're almost there to become a dentist, which is pretty good. So not only in your kind of activities that you're doing in terms of meeting the general public, you've been through the education system recently. And I thought it was really nice that you could come on board to tell us, is it the same situation today? Because obviously some of the things that we want to look at. And Manmohan Singh Seva as well, and you actually work out of Shepherd's Bush Gurdwara. It's a pleasure to have you on the show too. Thanks so much for joining. You've got a particular story you're going to tell us about your son as well, which was a really lovely story. Going to school, he's wearing a patka. I'll lead you into that. Tell us all about it.
Well, I think when we're discussing, we're talking about obviously, how we learned over the last, 20 odd years, 30 years of the Sikh community diaspora in the whole of the UK and across the world, who Sikhs are. And I think in my son's school, they certainly took the initiative to kind of do that research into who the Sikhs are. And I think when my son would go to the school and when he would do PE or if his patka would come off, the teacher would then try to put his patka back on again to the best ability they could. And they would take a keen interest into knowing, what is the Jura, why is it covered with the patka? And I remember that the teachers sent a letter home and communicated with my wife and basically asked her that, could you come and teach us how to do the patka? Because, you do it very neatly, very tidy. And when we try to mimic that, our ones are not as clean and tidy as yours. So we thought that was really nice of the school, trying to actually engage and trying to kind of celebrate the diversity of the school rather than saying, back in my time, it's a hindrance having a Jura and having a pug. The teachers saw it in a very different fashion. But the school my son goes to saw it as a positive that we've got people from a different multicultural background and the fact that they wanted to embrace that difference rather than neglect it. And then my missus went into the school, done a talk about the patka, talked about the ges and the Jura, and taught the teachers how to do it because there were other Sikh kids going there as well. And they could also then benefit of having neatly patka done after the swimming lessons. As a thank you to them for taking an interest in our child, and then organised a Gurdwara kind of a function where the teachers were called in and they were celebrated and they were shown for that we are thankful for their kind of work they're doing, and they were given like a sarapa and some flowers as a thank you.
That's very good. It's a very touching story as well, actually, and a real positive story in the sense that obviously we saw such gruesome scenes. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. Harpreet, tell us your experience at school. Obviously, it was just a few years ago, but do you think things were different now? I mean, I know when I was at school, there were only about 4 or 5 brown people, and then 2 or 3 years later, there were a lot more. That's guessing my age. But then I think when you're at school, I think similar case. It depends on where you grow up. Obviously, this particular child is in Telford, so obviously it depends on the surrounding communities. What was your impression when you saw this thing? Did it bring back any memories? Because I think you told me that you had a few issues, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah, yes, it did bring back some memories. Now, our sympathies go out to the family, to the boy that was attacked, to his family, and what they must be going through, because it did bring back memories. Now, I wasn't assaulted in the same way, but I definitely had a lot of abuse. You had to be very careful. So I was growing up in West London, in Greenford, back in the 70s and 80s, when there was a lot of trouble with the National Front and the skinheads. You did get a lot of abuse. You did have to be very, very careful. And yeah, it brought back memories. I saw that. As a parent, I felt bad. As a Sikh, I felt bad. As a Sardar, I felt bad. I think the thing I would say to you is that it is a problem for our children because we look different and other people don't accept that. And I think the problem is less for the brown children that don't have the bug, that don't have the beard. I think the problem is less for them. So I think it is a very bad problem out there. And I think that it's a problem of education. I think that we look different, but we're not different. We're human people. We have aspirations and we have desires and we have loves, just like everybody else. We just look a little different.
Yeah, and I think if ultimately it's also there's I mean very recent this week Guru Nanak's birthday. There's lots such lovely aspects of Guru Nanak that he taught us. Those values that we need to kind of carry out throughout our lives. Seem to be at the forefront of selfless service. I often think I was listening to an interview. Are we really up there at the United Nations being those leaders? Tell us, Jasleen, future leaders. Do you think that having recently been through schooling, I would say probably about 5 years ago, I guess, before you went into med school, do you not think things are getting better?
It's a hard one. When I was at school, I was very lucky. We grew up in Langley, Slough area, and we had a good experience as a childhood there because it's very much a brown community, Sikh community there also. So like you said about your school, I had a broken arm once. I couldn't do my brother's butker properly, and the teachers wanted to learn and took me out of my class, told them how can I help, how can I do this, and it happened regularly in PE when it just comes off and whatnot. So at school, lovely, didn't have an issue really, and then seeing that video, it really hurt. I actually couldn't watch it a second time. I had to stop the video because it felt like it was my brother getting beaten up. And I think wearing a patka, wearing a pug, is a sign of strength. And if he has to go through that to wear the pride on his head, it shows so much strength. And anyone who's still carrying that bug at an older age, they have gone through so much and it deserves so much more respect than those boys gave him. So that really hurt. But the thing is, I understand that it's a growing thing because I moved to Plymouth where there's not a large brown Sikh community or brown community even. There's not a Gurdwara here or anything like that. I mean, even working at the dental school providing treatment, people look at me and they ask like, oh, where are you from, or like asking questions. I say I'm Sikh proudly, and they've never heard of it and don't know what it is, didn't know it was a religion. So it's really education wise because of the way I look, and I don't wear a turban, but I have uncut hair and I'm clearly brown. So I think it is still a thing, but I'd say in uneducated areas. When you go to areas which has a high population or high area of brown people, then there's less of an issue. But as soon as you go out of that, you do feel that you are different.
Do you think it would have helped if, when you were at school, if there had been more information about, the sacrifice of the Sikhs during the World Wars, their prominence in terms of, the kingdoms that they've had in the past and how they've fought the tyranny of ethnic cleansing brought about by the Mughals? Is any of that information actually communicated, or is it very kind of colonial history? It's not.
I think you're absolutely correct that it should be taught. It's not taught because even at school, I only learned from hearing it from the elders in my family, not from school education. So even my friends at school didn't know about any of this. Even Hindus and Sikhs that are my friends and don't have any hatred or any abuse don't know about it. It's not a well-known concept or idea or taught at all. So it is really much an education thing.
So, Mamunga, do you not think that, I mean, you're clearly in a part of influence in one sense, although you were saying you're more of in the spokesperson part. Does the Sikh Council see this as being one of their missions, that they should be looking at the curriculum, looking at ways in which they could have particular projects where they can have art exhibitions or media or something that can better be able to communicate? And I guess that's one part of the question. The second part would be, do you think it's going to make any difference? If people did know, do you think if they're better educated, it would change their attitude? Because when I look at the video, and I know we kind of go back to the video for a second, then I think to myself, what about the parents? Is this attitude that particular kid got from the lack of education with the parents? Or is it inherent hatred because the kid doesn't know any better?
I mean, going to the first part of your question, I think after we saw that video, we had a meeting with the office bearers and with the executive committee in Sikh Council as well. And we did discuss at length that what changes do we need to make in the education system to make these changes. And I think you're all right. I think education is the main focus in this. And being in an area myself of Essex, when I was growing up, again, a lot of ignorance around the Sikh faith. And when I was in more myself to educate the local schools, I used to do presentations and send emails to schools and say, look, there is a growing population in Thurrock, in Essex, and I want to come and educate in your RE lessons about who the Sikhs are, because the Sikhs in RE is very marginalized. It's a 1-2 day lesson, if that, on the Sikh faith, and that's it. There's no kind of real progression on describing who the Sikhs are, and yet we look the most physically different from every other faith. We are the ones that carry the Dastar and the Dara, and yet we're not discussed that much. So I think after we've had that recent incident, we did look at the education aspect of it, and we have been talking to some of our pracharaks, like Nanak Naam. I've spoken to Satpal Singh, who you may know of, obviously Seek to Inspire as well. They do some fantastic work as well. So we're speaking to a few of our basic Sikhi as well, and we're speaking to a few of them to produce a material that can be sent to schools but is bite-sized. So it could be BBC style bite-sized programs on the Sikh faith. So what's the Sardar? What's the Sikh? What's the 5 articles of faith? What's the Gurdwara? What's the Guru Granth Sahib? What are our festivals? We do have this information, but unfortunately it's not bite-sized, and sometimes we don't give the clear information. We can sometimes waffle a lot. So I think the idea is now to produce material which we can use through the Department of Education, and at the moment we are making contacts with SACRE boards. There are local SACRE boards and there is a national SACRE board in the UK. And SACRE looks at the local government level education of RE in schools. So I used to be on the board in 2005 for Thurrock in Essex, and a lot of the time you can influence the syllabus and you can make sure that the right things are covered in the syllabus. So what we are looking at the moment is, and as a personal project on the Sikh Council as well, is to develop a program through SACRE so that if we produce these resources, they are filtered down to every school so that everyone gets a clear understanding of what a Sikh is.
And do you think that it will really make, I mean, obviously, if it does impact the child, you could also argue once a bully, you're always a bully, because they take on board that behaviour into maybe the workplace. And that's a completely different subject on workplace bullying and micromanagement, all that irritation that actually happens and as a distraction.
I think it's a start. But I do think at the same time, we've lacked in the side of resources for a long while. But as you're saying as well, there are going to be attitudes, like you just said, that are going to be unchangeable. But hopefully, if we can make that more of a minority than a majority, then we're on the winning side.
It could make a difference to the child when they grow up in their developmental aspect, if we assume that they do have a behavioural change. I strongly believe that, change comes from within, really. Once you realise you need to do something, you'll do something about it. You could be told by somebody else until they're blue in the face and you're kind of, reflecting back, you won't necessarily change. But if we look at the parent situation at the moment, do you think the education material that goes to them as bite-sized nuggets, you could call it, I mean, and they come back home and they go, oh, look, guess what I learned about this, particular religion. If that other generation that they're having to communicate with, which is possibly a generation behind, do we not need to make material that is across the board and wider appealing? And that's, I've said this before, and we had a conversation about it the other day. Storylines, dramas, not just tokenism that we're sitting on an advert somewhere, in the background of some movie somewhere. We're not necessarily in the mainstream in terms of being actually featured as real people. We're just little side characters. Do you not think that there's a requirement to invest in that? I mean, how many movies have you seen where there's been a Sikh guy or a girl that's kind of in there being portrayed and being respected? And there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the black community and the Jewish community, but where are the brown people, Although brown people are increasing, but where are the Sikhs in all of those storylines?
There is there's only one film that I can think of that has a Sikh character in it. The Inside Man. It's a Spike Lee film. Spike Lee made an absolute point of including a Sikh character, and there is a little bit of education in the film about Sikhism, but that is a very isolated example. So I think the point you're making about recognition of Sikhs and an appreciation of what Sikhs values are, and what they are humanitarian values. They are values that everybody should have. That isn't out there in the mainstream, and it most definitely, to the point that you're making about the parents, it definitely isn't something that is appreciated by a lot of people out there. So I think it's a very valid point. I struggle to see how we can actually make a big impact. I think it's small changes, as my respected colleague was saying there. You've got to start with the schools. You've got to start with bite-sized information. You've got to get that out there. I think we've got to use social media. We've got to get our profile up, and it's going to take time, but it's essential that we do it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think I know there's a lot of talk at the moment about, and there's a lot of people are struggling. There's a big thing at the moment in the media about farmers, etc. And then I look at other articles and I think, well, when people get questioned, they're almost like when the person's giving them an answer, they bias it towards an answer that they would like to hear rather than an answer that's actual fact. And also, they turn it into a different issue. It's not, and we're part of that issue, but it suddenly becomes a Sikh issue rather than the fact that, if you look at the percentage split in the northern part of India, there's not just Sikhs that live there, there's Hindus that live there. And as a community, we fight for all different communities. And I think this is a missing point, I think. I mean, Jasleen, when you look at the media and you watch the news and stuff, right, do you think it's a fair portrayal of, key points of information? Or do you think, I mean, I met somebody who worked for a pink newspaper, and they have a little agenda that every time they show a brown person, they show a brown person on a rickshaw with a mobile phone. Say, oh, look at that, patronize, I mean, do you ever see those kind of little, kind of subtle, stereotypes in whatever you see? And maybe that's a danger, that people are seeing stereotypes. So once they see a stereotype, they've made their mind up and they miss the key values that Harpreet was saying, which is the things that we really are about,
I think part of the point is that you don't see the social media. You don't see like the news on that sort of thing. It's hidden away. It's not the same sort of it's not shown in the same light as other media. So I think that's more of the issue, is that it's just not out there. It's not readily available compared to when it is shown. There may be certain biases and things like that. That's definitely happening. But the first point is actually show it. I think a lot of it's just not shown. And yeah, they do make the subtle things that you're just like, well, you had to add that because they're Sikh, or it's not just, it's another agenda, like you said. It feels like there's another agenda sometimes.
I also think that, when they show programs, do they all think that brown people go to sleep at midnight? Like they'll be and that includes a Muslim population as well. Oh, they're celebrating Eid. Let's put a tokenism program on at 11:30 to say, isn't it good about Eid? And do you ever see that? I mean, let's go around the table and see whether people agree with me on that, or whether they've got, whether we should feel grateful that the particular channels give us an opportunity, even if it's at 11:30 at night. Seems to be very. I know they did do some shows. There was a program on SWAT, and that was prime time, and there was also a program on Carter Aid as well about some of the stuff that they've done. But it's few and far between, isn't it? About what all the different groups are doing,
I think if I can just come in there, I think the look
Sure.
of a Sikh, a lot of the time doesn't fit into the positive aspect of media. A lot of the time, if you look at a lot of the negative aspects of, let's say, if the Taliban look, or the concept of fighting against the Islamic State and so forth, even though people are not aware of the differences, they kind of put us into that kind of category. And a lot of the time, our look isn't the look that fits the Western media or the social media they want to portray, because we are supposed to be the bad guys.
Canada
No,
don't have an
I
issue
think,
with.
but then we're talking about a very educated society. I think Canadians are the exception here, because if you look at their whole kind of progression in the community and how they've allowed a lot of ethnics to be in such prominent positions, we are very far behind, and yet we've been in this country longer. But unfortunately, the look of a thing is not the look that the Western media want to portray as a positive image, because for them, we need an enemy, and this look fits the enemy. And even if you look at Peter Pan, look, Captain Hook, is disabled. Even back when I was doing some work with the disability people, they used to say that disabled people are discriminated against by showing them in a negative light in the media, because a lot of the negative guys used to be disabled. So they've got an axe to grind because they've lost a limb or something, and they become evil. And hence the long hair, the turban, the beard, it all fits into that narrative. These are the baddies, and we're the Avengers, we're the goodies, and we're going to take them out. And I think we fit into that negative narrative rather than the positive. And until we start writing our own narrative, like you were saying earlier, we've got so many amazing artists which are coming forward. I mean, recently on Netflix, we're watching, I don't know, it's called Kim's Convenience. It's quite a funny kind of
Korean
teenage
comedy,
type
I
of
think.
drama to watch. Yeah, it's based in Canada. And one thing me and my daughters noticed, the amount of exposure that we're giving to Punjabi, female and male, and like you said, Korean, Chinese, Japanese artists was phenomenal. You were seeing so many, brown faces, and you could tell by their names, and a lot of obviously Asian faces given prominent parts in the drama. And it was nice to see that. It really made you relate to it, because a lot of the drama and a lot of the banter, you could relate to it. And you saw at last something which we can actually sit there.
We've got a challenge, I think, moving forward. Sadly, can you believe that time flies? It's only a short program. We could do at least a few series on that. I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on the show and spending time. I know, Jasleen, you had to run between different places to get there, and everyone had to come back from work early, so I really appreciate it, even though they were working from home. I was going to say thanks so much for joining me. I think beautiful contributions today. Things have changed to a certain extent, but they haven't changed enough. There is an opportunity, but we haven't necessarily taken the opportunity to do more. And there's a great sense of ideas around creating knowledge nuggets so that people are better absorbed. But I think in terms of the wider community, for them to know who we are and what we do and what we represent, I have another pet phrase, which is an example is leadership. And I think, amongst the people that we've got here, please exhibit your leadership in your own right to be able to do the things that you can do, but make it a better world, not just for the kids, but also for their parents, who can better instill values and to stop this kind of horrendous behavior. The family, and even if the family of the kid, hopefully they can see the negativity that kid did, and we wish that they can change the life of that particular bully. But everyone who's been involved, and really appreciate also your time for giving advice as well. We'll see you next time.